Welcome to the quiet verdict, where every story ends with justice. I found out my parents had stolen my identity while applying for my first apartment. I was 23 years old. I had a stable job, good credit, or at least I thought I did, and I was standing inside a leasing office in Atlanta, holding a paper cup of terrible coffee, when the property manager suddenly stopped smiling at me. She looked at her computer screen, then back at me, then back at the screen again. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "There has to be some mistake. At first I thought maybe my application had been mixed up with someone else's. Then she turned the monitor toward me, and I saw my own name attached to $340,000 in debt, 6 maxed out credit cards, a luxury SUV loan, 2 personal lines of credit, and a business LLC registered in Texas under my social security number. I stared at the screen so long the woman finally asked if I needed water. The oldest account had been opened when I was 14 years old. 14. Old enough to watch Disney Channel. Not old enough to legally open a credit card. I remember leaving the leasing office in complete silence. No tears, no panic. Just numb. Like my brain had temporarily stopped understanding reality. I sat inside my car for almost 40 minutes before finally calling my mother. And do you know what she said after I explained everything? She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she said, "Family shares everything, sweetheart." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't fraud from a stranger. My parents had spent almost 10 years building financial debt under my identity, while eating dinner across the table from me every night. And the worst part? They genuinely believed I would never do anything about it, because I was the quiet daughter, the responsible one, the one who kept peace. What they didn't understand was that I worked as a data analyst for a federal logistics contractor. Finding patterns was literally my job. And once I started tracing the accounts connected to my name, I uncovered something much bigger than debt. By the time the FBI got involved 14 months later, my mother was crying in a federal courtroom, and my father refused to look at me at all. My name is Willa Mercer, and this is the story of how I destroyed my own family to get my identity back. I grew up in a small town outside Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind of place where people still leave casseroles on porches after funerals, and everyone knows which families are struggling long before those families admit it themselves. From the outside, we looked normal, working class normal. My father, Randall Mercer, owned a small landscaping company that somehow was always about to turn around. My mother, Denise, worked reception jobs for short periods before quitting most of them after a few months because of office politics. Money was always tight, not dramatic television show poverty, just constant pressure. Overdue electric bills, late mortgage payments. My parents whisper fighting in the kitchen after midnight while thinking my brother and I were asleep. I learned very early how to make myself small around stress. Quiet kids usually do. My older brother Caleb handled tension by disappearing. Football practice. Friends' houses, anywhere except home. I handled it differently. I became useful. I washed dishes without being asked. Helped my mother sort bills at the kitchen table. Learned how to stretch groceries through the end of the month. By 15, I knew what foreclosure meant. By 16, I knew how to calculate late payment penalties faster than most adults. My mother used to joke that I was the little accountant of the family. At the time, I thought she was proud of me. Now I wonder if she was studying me. The strange thing about identity theft inside families is that it rarely begins with evil people sitting in dark rooms planning crimes. It starts with justification. Little lies people tell themselves while crossing lines 1 inch at a time. We'll pay it back before she notices. It's just temporary. Families help each other. That's how people slowly train themselves to stop hearing the word theft inside their own heads. The first account in my name was opened 3 weeks after my 14th birthday. A department store credit card with a $1,200 limit. Then came another one. Then another. A cell phone contract. Utility accounts. A small personal loan. Everything connected to my social security number. Everything using slight variations of my name. Sometimes Willa Ann Mercer. Sometimes W. Mercer. Always close enough to pass automated systems, far enough to avoid immediate detection. And while all of this was happening, I was upstairs doing algebra homework and worrying about biology exams, completely unaware that my financial future was already being destroyed downstairs in the kitchen. By the time I left for college at 18, my credit score technically already belonged to a bankrupt middle-aged man with gambling problems. Except that man was legally me. The irony is, I actually trusted my parents more than most kids trusted theirs, especially my mother. She had this way of making bad situations sound temporary, like every disaster was just one lucky break away from disappearing. When I got accepted into the University of Tennessee with a partial scholarship, she cried harder than I did. "We're so proud of you," she kept saying. And maybe part of her meant it. That's the complicated thing about people. Sometimes they love you and exploit you at the exact same time. College changed my life, not because of parties or freedom, because for the first time I lived around people who weren't constantly drowning financially, people whose parents paid bills on time, people who didn't panic every time the phone rang after dinner. I started realizing how abnormal my childhood actually was, and slowly, without even noticing it, I started building a life separate from my family. I majored in data systems and statistical analysis. Numbers made sense to me in ways people never fully did. Patterns, structures, things either matched reality or they didn't. No manipulation, no emotional rewriting, just facts. After graduation, I landed an entry-level analyst position with a federal logistics contractor in Atlanta. Nothing glamorous, mostly spreadsheets and fraud detection reports. But it was stable, predictable, safe. I rented a tiny studio apartment with stained carpets and a broken dishwasher. And honestly, it felt like freedom. For the first time in my life, no one was yelling about money in the next room, no final shut-off notices taped to the front door, no pretending things were fine when everyone knew they weren't. I thought I had escaped the chaos. I really did. Then, 2 months before my 24th birthday, I applied for my first real apartment and discovered my entire identity had been turned into a financial crime scene before I was even old enough to drive. Alecki. The apartment I applied for wasn't even expensive. That was the humiliating part. 1 bedroom. 3rd floor. Near Midtown Atlanta. Nothing luxurious, just clean walls, decent lighting, and a washer-dryer inside the unit instead of down a hallway shared with strangers. I had spent 3 years building toward that apartment, saving carefully, working overtime, living cheaply. The leasing agent's name was Brianna, 22 maybe, bright smile, pink nails, the kind of person who says absolutely a lot. At first, everything was normal. Income verified, employment verified, background check clear. Then she ran my credit report. I watched her expression change in real time, not dramatically, just small shifts. Confusion first, then concern, then professional discomfort. She turned the monitor slightly away from me instinctively, the way people do when they accidentally see something private. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "There may be some fraudulent activity here." Fraudulent activity. That phrase sounds clinical until it's attached to your own name. She asked if I had ever owned a construction business in Houston. I laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. Then she didn't laugh back. That was when my stomach dropped. I remember every detail after that with terrifying clarity. The fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the smell of burnt coffee from the lobby machine, the sound of someone laughing near the elevators while my entire understanding of my life quietly collapsed. Brianna printed the report for me. 34 pages. I still have them. Every account, every collection notice, every late payment, every loan tied legally to me. By the second page, my hands were shaking. By page 12, I stopped feeling my hands at all. There was a truck loan opened when I was 15. A business line of credit opened at 16. Medical debt from another state I'd never even visited. And near the bottom of page 23, the LLC, Mercer Outdoor Solutions, registered in Dallas, Texas, operating for 6 years, tax debt attached, estimated liability, $92,000. I stared at the company name for a long moment before realization hit me. Mercer Outdoor Solutions, my father's landscaping business, except he had always called it Randall's Lawn Care around us, which meant one thing. He had rebuilt his business under my identity. I remember looking up at Brianna and asking one question. "How bad is this?" She hesitated, which told me everything before she answered. "Willa, your credit score is 482. 482. I had coworkers with parking tickets higher than my credit score. I drove home in complete silence. No music. No phone calls. Nothing. Traffic moved around me, while my brain tried desperately to reorganize reality into something understandable. By the time I reached my apartment, I already knew who was responsible. Not because I had proof yet, because deep down, children always recognize the shape of their parents' damage. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Willa, honey, how's Atlanta?" I don't remember saying hello. I just asked, "Why is there $340,000 of debt under my social security number?" Silence. A long one. Then finally, she sighed. Not shocked. Not confused. Annoyed. Like I had brought up something inconvenient during dinner. "Honey," she said carefully, "your father and I were going to explain everything eventually." Eventually. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "You opened accounts under my name?" Another sigh. "Willa, families help each other." I couldn't speak for maybe 5 seconds. Then finally, I was 14. My mother laughed softly. Actually laughed. "Sweetheart, calm down. It's not like we killed somebody." That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Because in that moment, I realized my parents genuinely did not believe they had done anything wrong. To them, my identity was family property. Something useful. Something available. I asked where Dad was. "At work," she said quickly. "And don't start attacking him." He did what he had to do to keep this family afloat. Keep this family afloat. Meanwhile, I was eating ramen 3 nights a week trying to survive my 20s with ruined credit I didn't even know existed. I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I did something that would eventually destroy my entire family. I opened my laptop, and I started tracing every account connected to my name. 000. At first, I told myself I was only looking for information, just enough to understand the damage, just enough to figure out how to fix my credit and move on. But once you spend your life working with fraud detection systems, patterns become impossible to ignore. And the deeper I looked, the worse everything became. I took 3 days off work and turned my tiny apartment into an investigation room. Credit reports spread across the floor, legal pads filled with account numbers, bank statements, tax records, screenshots. By the second night, I stopped sleeping properly. I would close my eyes for 20 minutes, wake up, and immediately start tracing transactions again, because every account led to another one. Every lie connected to 5 more, and buried underneath all of it was my parents' handwriting. Literally. One of the utility applications still had a scanned signature attached. Willa A. Mercer, except the handwriting belonged to my mother. I knew because she wrote grocery lists with the exact same looping capital W. That discovery hit me harder than the debt itself. The intimacy of it, the fact that she had physically practiced signing my name. Over and over, I found credit cards opened in Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. I found tax returns filed under my identity claiming income I never earned. I found a payroll record listing me as an employee at my father's business, while I had actually been living in a college dorm 3 states away. And then I found the loans. That was when the fear started turning into something colder. $120,000 borrowed through a small business expansion program. My social security number, my name, my liability, collateral attached to properties I had never seen. If federal investigators ever looked closely enough, it would appear that I had participated willingly. I remember sitting alone on my apartment floor at 3 a.m, staring at those documents, and realizing something terrifying. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They had built an entire financial life, wearing my identity like a mask. And the craziest part? They still called me every Sunday, asking how work was going. My mother still mailed me birthday cards with $20 bills inside. My father still texted weather updates before storms. People imagine criminals as strangers. But sometimes, criminals are just the people who raised you. I confronted my father 4 days later. Not over the phone. I drove 6 hours back to Tennessee because some part of me still believed this would somehow make sense face to face. I found him outside the landscaping warehouse repairing a trailer hitch. When he saw me pull in unexpectedly, his expression changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. Like he had been waiting for this day for years. I got out of the car holding a folder thick with printed records. Neither of us spoke at first. Then finally I asked, "How long?" My father wiped grease from his hands slowly with a rag. "Your mother shouldn't have told you over the phone." That was his answer. Not denial, not apology, just criticism about timing. I stared at him. "There are federal loans under my name." He nodded once. "We always paid what we could." What we could. I felt something inside me cracking quietly. "Dad, I was a child." His face hardened slightly then, and for the first time in my life I saw something ugly underneath all the exhaustion and financial stress and excuses. Entitlement. "You had a roof over your head, didn't you?" He snapped. "Food. Clothes. School. We sacrificed everything for this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You destroyed my identity." "No," he said sharply. "We borrowed it. Borrowed it like my future was a lawnmower from the neighbor's garage." I remember looking around the property then, the trucks, the equipment, the warehouse. Everything around me suddenly looked stolen, because legally, part of it was. I asked him one final question. Did you ever plan to tell me? He looked away first. That was my answer. I drove back to Atlanta that same night. Rain, the entire highway home. My mother called 8 times. I ignored every call. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text message. Family doesn't involve lawyers against each other. I stared at the message for a very long time. Then I looked around my apartment floor, covered in fraudulent accounts opened before I was old enough to vote. And for the first time, I stopped thinking like a daughter. I started thinking like an analyst. Because analysts follow evidence. And evidence doesn't care who it hurts. The next morning, I called the Federal Trade Commission, not the police, not a lawyer, the FTC identity theft hotline. I sat at my kitchen table in sweatpants with cold coffee beside me, while a woman named Karen calmly walked me through the reporting process. Her voice stayed steady the entire time. Mine didn't. Halfway through reading account numbers aloud, I had to stop because my hands were shaking too badly to hold the papers. Karen waited patiently. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Willa, do you believe the people responsible had ongoing access to your personal records as a minor? I looked around my apartment, at the stack of fake tax filings, at the utility accounts, at 10 years of fraud carried out by the same 2 people who taught me how to tie my shoes. Yes, I whispered. There was a brief silence. Then her tone changed slightly, more formal now. You may need to contact federal law enforcement. Federal law enforcement. Hearing the words out loud made the situation feel suddenly real in a completely different way. Not family drama, not debt problems. Felonies, multiple felonies. For the next 2 weeks, I built a timeline. Every account, every forged signature, every fraudulent filing. I mapped addresses, cross-checked dates, tracked IP records tied to online applications. My job trained me to identify patterns inside logistics systems. Turns out financial fraud leaves patterns too. And my parents had been careless. Very careless. Most of the applications originated from the same internet provider attached to our family home in Tennessee. Several accounts listed my father's business phone number. One credit application even used my mother's personal email address accidentally. The deeper I dug, the more impossible it became to pretend this was temporary borrowing or financial desperation. This was organized, sustained, intentional. I finally contacted the FBI field office in Atlanta on a Thursday afternoon. I almost hung up twice before someone answered. A man named Special Agent Daniel Ruiz called me back the following morning. Calm voice, precise questions, no emotional reactions, just facts. How old were you when the first account was opened? Did you ever authorize any use of your identity? Did your parents financially benefit from the accounts? Could you provide documentation? By the end of the conversation, Agent Ruiz asked if I could come into the office Monday morning. I remember hanging up and staring at my phone for almost a full minute afterward, because once federal investigators become involved, there's no quiet way back to normal. My mother called that evening. I answered without thinking. Willa, honey, she said immediately. Your father says you've been asking questions around town. Questions around town, like I was gossiping instead of uncovering crimes. I stayed quiet. Then she lowered her voice. You need to stop this before somebody gets hurt. That sentence sat between us for a moment. Then I asked carefully, did you ever feel guilty? Silence. Long enough that I thought she might hang up. Finally, she sighed softly. We did what we had to do. No remorse, no shame, just justification. Again, I closed my eyes. There are federal business loans under my name. Willa, sweetheart, listen to yourself. You're acting like strangers did this to you. That was the moment something inside me finally detached emotionally, because I realized my parents genuinely believed biology erased accountability, as if sharing Dina gave them permanent access to my future. I spoke very quietly after that. I'm meeting with federal investigators on Monday. The silence on the other end became immediate and absolute. Then my mother whispered, "You wouldn't." Not angry, not emotional, truly shocked. Because after 23 years of being the quiet daughter, they had never imagined I would actually protect myself. I looked down at the timeline spread across my kitchen table. 10 years of fraud, $340,000. My entire adult life poisoned before it even started. Then I answered honestly, I already did. Ursh. The investigation lasted 14 months. 14 months of subpoenas, financial tracing, interviews, forensic accounting. By the end of it, federal investigators had documented over 70 fraudulent accounts connected to my identity. 70. The final estimated damage exceeded $400,000 once penalties and tax violations were included. I remember staring at the report Agent Porter handed me and thinking one strange thing over and over again. My parents spent more time building fake financial lives under my name than they ever spent asking who I wanted to become. The indictments came down in early September. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax fraud, forgery, conspiracy, words that sounded impossible attached to the people who used to drive me to piano lessons. News traveled fast back home in Tennessee. Small towns survive on gossip the way cities survive on traffic. Former neighbors started messaging me online, some supportive, some accusing. One woman from church actually wrote, "They're still your parents, honey," as if biology erased criminal records. The first court hearing took place in Knoxville Federal Court on a rainy Monday morning. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted distance from all of it, but Agent Ruiz advised me quietly, "You deserve to see the truth acknowledged publicly." So I went. My father looked older than I remembered. Smaller too. The confidence he carried my entire childhood seemed to have collapsed inward somewhere during the investigation. My mother looked angry more than afraid. Even then, even sitting in federal court, she still carried herself like someone unfairly inconvenienced rather than criminally exposed. When she saw me enter the courtroom, her face changed immediately. Not shame, betrayal. As if I had somehow wronged her by refusing to keep quiet. That hurt more than I expected. The prosecution laid everything out methodically. 10 years of identity fraud, forged applications, business records, federal loan misuse. At one point, they displayed side-by-side comparisons of my mother's handwriting next to forged signatures under my name. The similarities were undeniable. I watched my mother lower her eyes for the first time in my entire life. Then came the hardest part. Victim impact statements. I hadn't planned to speak originally, but the night before court, I sat awake thinking about every birthday dinner where my parents smiled across the table while secretly destroying my future behind the scenes, and suddenly silence felt dishonest. So I stood. My hands shook carrying the paper to the podium. The courtroom looked colder from the front somehow, more official, less human. I unfolded my statement slowly, Then I looked directly at my parents. My entire adult life began with debt I didn't create, I said quietly. My first apartment application became a fraud investigation. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I spent years believing I was financially failing because I wasn't working hard enough. My father still wouldn't look at me, but my mother stared straight ahead, frozen, completely still. Then I said the sentence I had rewritten at least 20 times the night before. You taught me that family protects each other. I paused, and then you used my identity like it belonged to you. The courtroom stayed completely silent. No dramatic reactions, no crying, just truth sitting heavily in the room where nobody could escape it anymore. I finished my statement and sat down beside the prosecutor without looking back. 2 months later, both of my parents accepted plea agreements. No trial, no public defense, no pretending investigators got it wrong. My father received reduced sentencing due to cooperation and financial disclosures. My mother didn't. The judge called her actions sustained financial exploitation of a minor. Hearing those words nearly broke something inside me, because suddenly there it was. Official. Permanent. Not family misunderstanding. Not borrowed money. Exploitation. By the end of the year, my fraudulent debt was formally cleared through federal intervention. My credit history was rebuilt account by account. Slowly. Legally. Correctly. For the first time in almost a decade, my name belonged entirely to me again. S. People think justice feels victorious, like fireworks, like relief. Honestly, it felt quiet. The morning after my parents accepted their plea agreements, I still woke up at 6:30, made coffee and answered work emails before 8. The world didn't suddenly become lighter, but it did become clearer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying responsibility for secrets I never created. That changed something inside me slowly, like pressure leaving a room 1 inch at a time. Over the next year, federal agencies worked with credit bureaus to remove the fraudulent accounts tied to my identity. It wasn't immediate. Nothing bureaucratic ever is. Some mornings I still opened letters from collection agencies that hadn't updated records yet. But now, I had documentation, case numbers, federal rulings, proof. Funny how powerful proof feels after spending years being manipulated into doubting your own reality. I finally got approved for an apartment 11 months later. 1 bedroom. 4th floor. Nothing luxurious. But when the property manager handed me the keys, I sat inside my car afterward and cried harder than I had during the entire investigation. Because those keys represented something simple most people never think about. A future. One legally attached to my own name. My relationship with my brother Caleb became complicated after everything happened. He claimed he didn't know how bad it was. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Family systems train people to ignore damage as long as they're not the direct target of it. We speak occasionally now. Birthdays mostly. Short conversations. Careful ones. My mother wrote me 6 letters during the first year after sentencing. I read all of them exactly once. None contained a real apology. Mostly explanations. Stress. Financial pressure. Sacrifice. The same justifications rewritten in softer language. I stopped responding after letter 3. My father only wrote once. 3 lines total. I should have stopped it sooner. You deserved better from us. I'm sorry. I stared at that letter for a very long time. Because strangely, those 3 sentences were more honest than everything else combined. I keep the letter locked inside a small fireproof box now, not because it fixes anything, because sometimes acknowledgement matters even when repair isn't possible. 2 years later, Agent Porter invited me to speak at a financial identity theft seminar for college students in Atlanta. I almost said no immediately. Public speaking terrified me. But then I thought about 14-year-old me sitting upstairs doing homework while fraudulent accounts were opened downstairs using my future, and I realized silence helps the wrong people. So I stood in front of 200 students, holding a microphone with shaking hands, and told them exactly what happened to me. No dramatic speeches, just facts. Boundaries. Documentation. Warning signs. Afterward, 3 students stayed behind to talk privately. One girl cried while describing suspicious accounts her parents controlled under her name. That was the moment I fully understood something important. Family fraud survives because people are ashamed to name it, but shame belongs to the people committing the abuse, not the people surviving it. Last spring, I finally bought my first condo. Small balcony, gray kitchen cabinets, a view of downtown Atlanta if you lean slightly left near the windows. Nothing extravagant, but every mortgage document carries my real signature. Every utility account belongs legally to me. Every piece of my future is finally attached to my own choices. And sometimes late at night, I still think about that leasing office. The fluorescent lights, the terrible coffee, the moment my entire life split into before and after. Because losing trust in your parents changes you permanently, but reclaiming yourself changes you too, just in a different direction.